podcasting world. I'm joined by a number of excellent guests. And if I could start with Kameel, please, just to introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Shandukani and then Paula.
Hi, my name is Kameel Stanley, and I am a podcast producer and journalist based in St. Louis, Missouri in the U.S. I've been a journalist for over a decade now. I started in newspapers and did a lot of investigative work, and then about 5 years ago crossed over into the audio space. Worked at a public radio station and moved there to do podcasting. And so, I have fallen in love with it, and I just love playing with sound and telling stories that way.
Shandukani.
Oh, I'm Shandukani Mulaudzi, and I am based in Johannesburg. My current job title is executive producer of podcasts at Children's Radio Foundation. We are in the very exciting place of show development for a new podcast that we're trying to launch here, but that will cover a number of young people around the continent. So we're very excited about that. And I've had a history in journalism in digital as well as magazines and newspapers and branding at some point as well. And so to find myself back with my first love, which is audio, is very exciting. And this is a really good place to be.
Paula.
Excellent. Yes. Excited to be here. My name is Paula Rogo. I am the co-founder of Africa Podfest, which is where we would have all been given different circumstances. And then also the founder of Kali Media, which is a women-focused media company out of here in Kenya, from which I've created Kali Pods, which is going to be a women-focused, East African women-focused podcast network. Journalist by training that somehow found herself entering the media entrepreneurship space and building what is now Africa Podfest. And excited to talk to all of you today.
Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. It's really a pleasure for me to meet you all. Unfortunately, not in person. We will meet in Nairobi one day, I'm certain. Paula, I'd like to start with you as one of the founders of African Podfest, and just get a sense of what your thinking was around the title for this particular session that we're engaged in now. What is radio's place in a podcasting world? My sense was always that it was kind of the other way around, and so I just want to get from you what your sense of the pulse is in terms of, if we're allowed to say, radio versus podcasting on the subcontinent in particular.
Yes, so the title was very intentional. We wanted to center podcasting as the focus of this conversation, rather than have it be sort of the step sister to radio, which often seems to feel the case when we talk about podcasting, at least within the Kenyan context that I have been working in. And we really, as a team, myself and Melissa Mbugwa, who's my co-founder, and Josephine Kayanjai, who's part of the leadership team, actually realized how important this particular panel was, because based on an interview we actually did with BBC a few weeks ago in sort of promoting the Podfest. And one of the questions which didn't make it to air that the journalist asked us was, is Africa even ready for podcasting? Are we too early to be even talking about podcasting? And this was BBC, which is a very, at least within the African context with their World Service, has a really strong radio base here in Africa. When we talk about radio in Africa, it is king. Nothing else competes with it. It is the strongest medium. I can throw quite a few stats to you about that. And so here we were as a team talking to someone who was from if radio is king, one of the strongest aspect of that kingdom, talking to us about how podcasting, implying that podcasting was sort of reaching above her breeches, basically, and claiming its space. And so for us, in choosing the panelists that we've even chosen today, we know we wanted people who could speak to both sides of radio and podcasting, and not see it as a one versus the other, but just sort of have it as a conversation in which we figure how they play together in this audio space, especially as it expands within Africa.
Cool, thanks. Before we go on, I just thought I'd throw out, we were talking earlier, Paula and I, offline, about trying to get some stats, or just give people some sense of how podcasting globally has grown, and even on the African continent that's supposedly not maybe perhaps ready for it. For example, this is from Amplify Media. The podcast movement is a recent event that took place in the United States, and the guy's commenting 4 years ago, 6 radio people in attendance. This time around, 2,300 attendees, hundreds of people from virtually every commercial radio company, he says. So there's something going on there. You have national public radio in the United States, and Kameel perhaps will be able to comment a little bit about this, launched their podcasting project in 2005, 170 programs. 10 years later, 170 programs, by November that year, 5 million downloads. 10 years later, 94 million downloads. It seems to be sort of an exponential and massive growth. 550,000 podcast titles on Apple Podcasts, more than there are movies on the IMDb database of film. But I'm trying to sort of place where podcasts are in the broadcast or in the media environment in general. My experience in the podcasts that I listen to, and certainly Shandukani, from a South African point of view, I think you'd agree, most of the podcasts in this country are simply rejigged radio programs that are sort of more on-demand radio programs rather than curated podcasts for specific niche listeners. And I'm just wondering how you, Shandukani, to react to the title of this session in that kind of context.
I really love the name of this this topic, because I'm always thinking about this, and I think that for me, radio and podcasting are very complementary. The one can benefit from the other, and vice versa. I think within a South African context, the on-demand kind of radio that is referred to as podcasting makes me very upset because I'm just like, people work so hard to create podcasts, and to just call on-demand radio podcasting is just like, yeah,
I tell you.
I'm just like, I studied for this thing. It's not the same. It's not just cutting something and putting it on the internet and then calling it a podcast. So, and very recently someone said to me, they're like, you went to school for that? And I was like, no, let me explain. So I think, for example, if we think about the national broadcaster in South Africa, the SABC, it would be remiss of people who are working on podcasts to not look for collaborative spaces with the national broadcaster in order to reach wider audiences. Like Paula said, radio is king, and if you don't bring people's attention to this other medium that is trying to make a dent in this market, then we're going to end up in a situation where we are forever niche, and are not being part of the mainstream conversation. And the way I see it, what podcasting is to radio is what digital a few years ago was to print. The two complement each other, and digital is an extension of print, and therefore so is podcasting. It can find ways to enhance and make radio something bigger, or give more focus or more time to certain topics that we often cannot fit into the radio clock. So I love this topic, and I think that I am very excited about the types of things that people can do in Africa on radio as well as in podcasting together.
Kameel, you sort of have straddled, you've kind of not, I suppose, not gone in at the ground floor, but you've had many years now in podcasts. You've worked in radio and now for a newspaper. And I just want to get a sense of those two different worlds and how they are treating podcasts, or how they see podcasts as a means of growing their listenerships or readerships, or readerships, or vice versa.
So it's very interesting, the journey that I took. But before I dip in a little bit of that to explain like kind of the different worlds, something that really rings true to me about podcasting and how it like is akin to digital and print is, for me, podcasting, I think one of the things that sets it apart is it disrupted the audio industry because of kind of the democratization of the distribution. And so when we think about how, in print, you have kind of your legacy big media players, and they kind of set themselves apart as like, we're the only ones who can do this thing. Same thing in radio. We're the only ones who can do this thing, and we broadcast it out, and we're great at this. And I was trained in that system, so I'm a believer in that. But the thing that happened with digital was the distribution method, and the distribution method, and just the tools that everyday people had meant that they could participate in making content and making media. And the same thing is happening with podcasting. And so suddenly the space, audio, the space is more inclusive. And that has freaked people out, because suddenly like there are tons of people who are creating content. And I remember this very distinct tension that happened when I was still a newspaper reporter and blogging suddenly exploded. And we were having these conversations about, well, if citizen journalists, and who gets to call themselves a journalist, and who gets to call, like, is a blogger, like, is that a step down from a journal? And we had all these, we were just so in our heads and in our feelings about it. And I see the same thing happening with podcasting, because now you have radio people who are like, we're the ones who make stories with audio, and we're the ones who, do that. And like, so is a podcaster a step below, is a podcast producer a step below a producer at NPR? Well, there's a lot of people making great stuff who don't have the training, who didn't go to school, who didn't like, and so it's freaking people out. But ironically, I grew up with a mother who had me listen to, we listened to NPR in the car. I did not love it, but she would put it on. Right? And And so it was something that was a part of my childhood, radio. And yet I became a journalist, and I never, ever saw myself as a Black woman having a place in that world in my profession. And yet I was a journalist and I told stories. But when St. Louis Public Radio reached out to me to recruit me to come help them with produce a podcast at the public radio station, that was my in. So I actually came into public radio through podcasting, and so I came in the back door. And I think that has something to do with, I was drawn as a journalist and just as a person to kind of the storytelling possibilities of podcasting, and feeling like, oh yeah, this is my world, even though it's all audio. But for some reason, there was a barrier there where, even as a professional storyteller, I did not feel included into the professional audio world. And so I entered into this different door. And I think a lot of people who are doing podcasting now, it's their way into this world that for many reasons, we can get into that. That's a different conversation. We know the reasons. But there are barriers there. And so I think that's freaking people out. But I will say your earlier question was about being in these two different worlds, because I have lived in kind of the newspaper, digital, print world, and now into audio, and how does podcasting fit into both those things? I think a lot of people may have misconceptions about the US podcasting scene. And the truth is, maybe the dirty secret is, like, we are just as in the wilderness as everyone else. Maybe we're a little bit further along into the woods, into the forest, but we're still in the forest, in the woods here, and people are still kind of trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I think it sort of remind. I mean, we've you spoke about blogging versus journalism. I suppose it also reminds me a little bit about the music industry coping with Apple, iTunes, or Spotify, these distribution models, MySpace, even things like that. Just these multifarious channels that are open to people, to allow them to create, to express, etc., etc. And I think you say you're in the woods. I suppose, well, if you're in the woods in the United States, we're all in the woods. But I think it feels like a friendly woods. I don't know, Paula, what you say.
I really appreciate the context you gave there about how big media is viewing podcasting, which is also in context of this conversation. One of the things, two things that have happened within Kenya as it pertains to the podcasting space. Number one, the early pioneering podcasters and those who are actually having the biggest impact in the market right now, not necessarily by numbers, but maybe by impact, are podcasters who themselves fall outside mainstream media, or their topics fall outside mainstream media. So the ones that come top of mind are, for example, the Afro-Queer podcast, which speaks directly to the LGBTQ community continent-wide, but it's recorded here in Nairobi. One of the top podcasts for a very long time, and still is The Spread, which is a sex podcast by Kaz Lucas that has now expanded into so many other different things. But here she has this space that she's created where she's talking about sex and freely. And so it's these sort of, and she's found a niche audience for it. And so it's these, so what's interesting to me to hear about South Africa, that a lot of the podcasts are big media, just sort of repackaging what is already on the radio and calling it a podcast. That's not the case here. In fact, big media here has been very, they're going through, there's been a lot of layoffs in the last year with our biggest media houses. They're very nervous about making moves about digital, because what does, their video was big a few years ago, and then does this podcasting thing fall under that? And so even for Podfest, it was really key that we created this event that was actually separate from the main program, where we brought some of the senior leadership in editorial from different media houses around Kenya to just teach them what podcasting was and the opportunities for it, because in many ways they were looking at it and weren't sure what to do with it, but could sense that podcasting was coming. So it's very interesting to hear that South Africa seems more, however, the form of the podcast, their bigger media seems to be more open to at least trying out podcasting.
The idea, yeah. Shandukani, I just wanted to ask you now, the Children's Radio Foundation, training young reporters around the continent, voices of communities. When did you, can you just give us a little bit of your organization's journey or relationship to podcasting? Because I imagine you started out training radio journalists, and now you're training podcasters, or you giving them podcasting skills. How do those different? How has that sort of come about?
So the organization itself, the NGO part of it, is still continuing with radio training, because the platforms that the young people have access to, most of whom are in high school, are the community radio stations in their area. But we realized that a lot of our young people can't get into university after they've gone through our program, and don't really have a lot of opportunities in their areas to do that. So part of creating a program or an organization that has longevity in it has been this idea of giving these new skills so that people can create new opportunities, and so that we can create new opportunities. And so what we are trying to do in the long run is to create training programs that will then assist us in ensuring that our youth, as well as other young journalists, because as Paula said, a lot of jobs are running out in journalism, have opportunities to create this new world of jobs that they can get into through podcasting. I mean, it's not just the training of how to report for podcasts or how to interview for podcasts, but the writing, the producing, the engineering, and things like that.
The technical skills as well. Yeah.
Yes, which contribute, or which aren't really things that people think about when they're in the radio side of things or any other kind of media. I think the other thinking for us was that, you know, the NGO space is also in a very, very difficult position as funding runs out, right? Mm. And so we saw an opportunity with podcasting to be for profit on that side of things, so that we are not completely reliant on funding in the long run, and we can still keep the NGO running. Otherwise, we're going to run out of funds, or we're going to have to do things in order to get money that are not cool.
That's kind of quite interesting. So you're creating almost your own podcast channel using or you giving your students the opportunity to use your channel for their own projects.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping in the long run. I mean, this is a very what do you call it? A big idea, and what seems very, very daunting at this stage of the game. But what we are planning on is a podcasting company, which is own animal outside of
on its own. Cool. Kameel, I sort of wrote here in my notes, breaking news is breaking news. So radio will always have the edge when it comes to that, to news. And then I've written here differences between radio and podcasts, live versus on demand, mass versus niche. Do you see perhaps a world in the future where public radio or broadcast radio will be kind of strictly news and music, and then people will get their more in-depth kind of niche content from podcasts, or is there kind of, how do you see that working in the future?
I think that based on what I'm hearing in the US, that we are at a moment, at least here in the US, where it's really a blend, because I think because people can go in their cars or sit at home and turn on the radio and they can hear news, but they can also hear podcasts, whether they seek them out on their phone or their local station is playing like an episode, that people are actually we're conditioning people to hear both. And some people can't even distinguish both. They just think that sometimes they hear news, and then other times they get sucked into a story that if they know what podcasts are, then they know that they can get more of this in this other world on their phone or wherever they're listening to podcasts. And other people are just radio listeners who are getting all these getting like a well-rounded meal, because I think it is. And they just think that that's what the radio has become. So I I definitely think that they can coexist, and I don't think that either one is going away, so to speak. More so, what I hear is people who, a lot of people my age who maybe just listen to podcasts because that's kind of where they came into audio or where they're experiencing. So they're not listening to the radio, even though they could, in theory, maybe in some places hear both news and podcasts on the radio. They're just not even turning that on because it's literally a different function that you have to do. So.
Yeah, that's something I've noted here as well. I'll just throw it out here to you, maybe Paula, and then Shandukani, you can follow up, is about the sort of the new way of listening, and that the younger generation, like Kameel and yourselves, fellow panelists, not me, I'm an old geezer, but you youngsters, you have a device now that allows you to access all of this audio information. Is that going to be then the way that, and I'm thinking of a sub-Saharan Africa in particular, massive young population, that will be the way that people will not only access news, but all kinds of audio information via a device. Paula?
Yeah, just this excites me. I'm getting excited getting to this part of the conversation. When I hear Shandukani talking about training youth, when I hear Kameel talking about what her age group and peers, how they're accessing this audio, that's what excites me. And then, of course, Nicholas, you brought up these youth numbers that are always being thrown in our face, about how I think majority of the continent right now is under the age of 20. Let me just stop there. I wish I could pull, so majority, and I would
Melissa.
say, yes, where are these numbers? I think it's about 70%, and that's me being very, 70% of, I think the continent is under the age of 25. I'm just gonna be a little broad there.
That sounds kind of right.
Yes, and this particular age group does not have a medium that they have fully connected with yet. And so the opportunities there then for podcasting, especially when you start talking about the democratization of podcasting and what it's done in terms of allowing different voices, into the mainstream or just into the stream in general is really, really key in this aspect, and is why I think some people also get nervous also when they consider what podcasting could do. And so if we just look at the trends, and that's why it gets very difficult. One of the biggest questions we always get at Africa Podfest is, can you share some data? Can you share some numbers on podcasting? Numbers, there are no numbers of that kind here in Africa. But what we try to do is say, okay, here are radio numbers, here are youth numbers, and we try to imply and sort of give people a picture, if they were really to consider what would happen if we set up the ecosystem in a way where podcasting could thrive. Because as it currently stands, it cannot thrive in this particular ecosystem. For example, there is not one distribution platform that most people can go to. We are an Android continent, and the Android owner does not open their platform to Africa. What does then that mean? WhatsApp is one of the biggest ways that we share things, right? But and actually there are WhatsApp only podcast networks. I think there's a show specifically in South Africa. What's up? I think it's what it's called, from Volume Africa. Very sorry, Volume, if I got that wrong. And people are considering distribution in those kinds of ways, but what does it mean when a barrier to podcasting is the cost of a microphone, which is expensive to most people, right? What would happen if all we had to do was use our phones to record, to cut, edit, and to distribute podcasts? And that means certain technologies, certain softwares have to be put in place, specifically thinking about the African context. And so that's what Podfest was for. That's what for these kinds of conversations to happen. They get me excited, as you can see, because you then start to connect the dots of different people with their different experiences. Shandukani and what's happening with CRF, who know radio very well and know youth very well and understand what it would take to connect, moving into podcasting. That says a lot for CRF to say, the Children's Radio Foundation to say, I am also going into podcasting. So a lot of interesting things are coming up for me as I hear all of you sort of share your thoughts.
Yeah, I think, the way, and I think this is the part of me that took a break from journalism and went into the branding space for a little bit. Understanding that, our audiences are the same as any other customer, right? And the way in which brands look at their customer bases. They're the loyalists, who are people who've been with you forever. And those are what you have referred to which I don't like, Nicholas, as the old geezers. And then you have the people who are like a hybrid of two different experiences, who might have grown up with their parents being the loyalists of a certain brand, but also have influences from other brands and also want to move forward. And therefore, if we use an example like Nike, will go for the sort of fashionable shoe, but isn't necessarily the most fashionable one or the latest brand. And then there's the last group who are just, where they have been placed is whatever comes out first, that's who I am. And so the way that I think about it is, you have in our context, we have the audiences that will also act based on being referred to. Also, if you tell my mother, for example, Mom, I have a subscription to Apple Music and you can use it, then suddenly she's going to start playing playlists in her car and knows that that's something she can do, right? And then you have us who will do the hybrid, who still have our CD players in our homes, as well as the Apple Music and Spotify and whatever. And then you have the kids who are probably going to go digital first, but then hear somewhere that, you know, one day CDs are going to make a comeback and you want to have them. And so they're going to buy the CDs, and they do that for like this weird sort of like, oh my gosh, I'm so cool because I do retro kind of thing. So the audiences are always there in different places, and they are constantly trying new things depending on what feels good at the time or what feels interesting at the time. So even if I am not necessarily going to listen to the radio on my way to work in the morning, I might listen to a podcast like The Daily that is breaking news, but take the breaking news to another level because they go a little bit deeper into the facts of the day. And then maybe still go to my phone and read more about those things and hear what happened on the go in terms of the breaking news of that story, so that I can understand the context that the daily was giving me and how it looked and whatever. It's the same idea as what social media does with people, is that yes, fine, people might see the links on social media and read the headlines, but they still will go to the platform where they can read more about the thing and see what the news of the day is. I think all these audiences coexist, and I think that they all are very important for us so that we understand, okay, cool. So even if we do go into podcasting, how do we make people aware that the podcasting exists? And how do we make sure that the podcasting doesn't exist in a vacuum, but is accessible to everyone on in the audiences that we're trying to build? And that also will then lead us to conversations about language in an African context, because we need to be very aware of the fact that many people are not speaking English in or French or Portuguese. And so how do we reach those people in those different contexts as well?
Kameel, do you want to say something?
Yeah, this is so exciting. This is so exciting.
Silly question.
I think the best thing about this conversation is about what I love about being in podcasting is because we are all it's going to sound so clinical, but like media practitioners. And yet what's exciting about podcasting is like it forces you, because it's so much closer to audience. Like this is where all the interesting, like exciting things are. Like this to me is what's exciting. What excited me when I was, 19 about journalism, the possibilities, like trying to make an impact is what's like, I've kind of rediscovered that passion in podcasting. But where I think we all are going is how do we make sure that we capture this excitement about what's possible and really getting kind of in the weeds with our audience and making sure that we're making something that's meaningful to where it has to go for us to keep practicing, which is not always the fun part, which is like, how do we make it sustainable? And by sustainable, I mean like literally, how are we going to make it financially possible so that the opportunity exists for people who make podcasts to do it and to also pay their bills, or people who are figuring out the distribution are doing that in a way so that it's not, is there a way for podcasting and for us for it not just to become sucked up into the giant media machine and kind of just overtaken, and for to keep the spirit of this conversation and still really break through and make something that's good. Will the democratization like hit, I guess, our pocketbooks as well? Because we all know it's extremely hard to make money as well. But I think that's important, and but not losing that in like the spirit of what we've been talking about and the possibility. So, but it's all super exciting.
Can I just say something funny about what you're talking about with the keep making sure that we can all still make money and the big machine doesn't take us. It's like the conversation about legalizing weed. It's like, no, guys, we can't allow people, the big corporates, to take over the weed industry, because the small man on the road who's been selling weed for many, many years can't be thrown and cast aside because now we've made this thing this like big money making scheme. So you're right. I just want to put that up.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to making some money one day. Nice one.
Can I ask, there's a sense of big corporates coming, because now, like, just based on the data that Nick shared earlier and about podcast movement and how it was only so many radio folks who came to it a couple of years ago, and then suddenly it's a lot of people are looking at podcast on your side of the world. So does it feel like it's losing its charm, its small connecting with the peopleness, I guess? Or
I don't think it's not lost its charm yet, but I do think that eventually it will become like it's like that girl who like she's not super cute yet, but eventually she like gets a makeover and suddenly like everybody's like, oh, that girl's so cute, like, and everybody wants to get with her. And so eventually like the podcast scene she'll grow up and she'll be like, oh my gosh, like, oh, she's cute, have you seen, oh, I haven't seen her since middle school, but have you seen her recently, like yeah. So and at that point, like everybody wants to like glom on. I think we're getting to that point definitely in the US where I think podcast has like grown up enough where they feel like, wow, we actually have to take this seriously and we want to make some money. But I don't think it's to the point yet where there's still not yet like a fight or a chance to truly make it and keep it something different, a different type of media. And that's where I hope that it stays, and where I think Africa has an amazing opportunity right now because of where it is to really carve out something that can be new and different and stay new and different and not get just swallowed up.
Right. And I think we're at that strange in between place because well, it's like Shandukani sort of indicated a little earlier about you don't want podcasting to remain niche. You'd like it to potentially become mass market. But what happens when it enters the mass market area? And for us, what's been interesting is when radio presenters move into podcasting, and we've had a couple who've done that. One who did it exclusively, she only podcasts now and is actually, I think, has been one of the biggest biggest influences in terms of education about what a podcast is, because she was already so popular. And so when she moved over into this podcasting world, a lot of her fans moved over and figured out what podcasts are. And she brought a really interesting base into the podcasting space. And with that, also potential advertisers and sponsors who are also still looking at podcasting as what is this strange thing, and can I treat it the way I treat influencers? Now, I'm not sure how influencers are treated in South Africa, but within Kenya, they're popular, they're respected in terms of the numbers and of eyes they bring, but corporates don't know how to deal with them respectfully. And so in many ways, podcasts also being digital is also falling into that space of we know people look at you and listen to you, but we don't know what to do with you per se. And Shandukani, you came from branding at some point, maybe that world, and maybe you're seeing something quite different within South Africa. But I know for us, even explaining about the podcast festival to corporates was a little mind-blowing to some people. Yeah.
Yeah. Kameel, you seem like you have something to say, but I just want to quickly touch on the influencer space is different and it's difficult. So there's two ways in which I think corporates are actually to blame for a lot of what's gone wrong. Is that they would use influencers based just on the numbers that they have on their following or whatever, but did not think about the brand alignment and the ideas where it's about authenticity. And audiences are not stupid, right? We get to a point where we're like, there's no way that this person should be talking about, I don't know, like maternity wear when they've never had a child, or like, you know what I mean? So it's just, there's weird sort of things where they would choose someone who was completely wrong for the brand. And then now you're like, okay, well then influencers are stupid and we hate influencers. But it's not the influencer's fault. If someone is willing to pay me to talk about maternity wear and I ain't got no other job, I'm going to sell the maternity wear, you know? If it is what it is, we're trying to make money. So I don't blame the influencers, and I also don't blame audiences for the way in which they've responded to it in that sense. I think that there has been mistakes when it comes to, I guess, the middleman, who's the advertising company, on deciding on which influencers to use. When it comes to celebrities or radio personalities going into podcasting, what we did have was two very big radio people who did that. Well, three actually. There's one called Gareth Cliff, who started his own thing called Cliff Central. Then there's Thibaut Touch, who was on Metro FM, who started Touch HD, which was, I'm not sure if they were actually liquidated or not. And also then there's DJ Swoo, who's got massive Metro. But all of those are actually just online radio. If you listen to them, it's radio online every day, right? But it's not podcasting. And so there's that element of it where people are interested but are listening to it much later, and aren't really sure if this is a model that works. Some of the people in some cases are not getting paid to be on those platforms. So it's just, it's very murky. So I don't know, like I don't think in South Africa at the moment we have very big people with big followings right now who are doing podcasting yet. What we do have is people who have tried to get into radio, and it's been so difficult to get into radio that they were like, actually, screw the system, I'm going into podcasting and I'm going to do my own thing. And a very good friend of mine, Simi Arif, who was also supposed to be one of the speakers, was one of those people. He tried Simi's very pushy. He tried very hard to get into one of the big radio stations, and they kept shutting him down. So he was like, okay guys, bye, thank you so much, I'm gonna go start my own thing. And he's doing pretty well, and trying to find different ways in which to monetize his podcast. So there's opportunities. There are some people who are trying to take advantage due to their influentialness, but it's, yeah. And also, yeah, I don't know, I don't want to say too much because then now people come after me.
Kameel, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, in terms of like the swallowing that happens, you know, here in the US, when we talk about media and big media, we are often talking about and who's in and who's out. We are, as with most things in the US, we are also talking about the racial dynamics. And here, I think one of the things that that people worry about, or at least journalists of color worry about, podcasts of color worry about, is we're in this medium that, like I said before, you know, is kind of the democratization of the audio space. And I think one of the things that will be a marker on whether or not we are able to either create something new and better, or if it just ends up, you know, in a few years we're just like, well, just got swallowed up, is if in the kind of growing up of podcasting, if the people and the voices who have been creating and who are part of that expanded field, if they are part of this new whatever it is. And that to me is a really good signifier of whether or not as things get bigger, you know, as you want things to get, you know, you want it to become big, you want it to become mainstream or whatever, who is allowed to be part of that? Who is allowed to get a piece of that? Who is allowed to have their own companies like Kali Media and play in that space and create new things? Where are there actual new avenues that are being created? Or is it literally just the same people who have controlled everything for a long time just come, swallow it, spit out the things and the people that they don't like, and keep it moving. And so that is something that I think is a good marker for us all, wherever we are, to look at, like, who are the folks in the US. There's definitely a racial component. And on the continent, it might be different, but you know the people right now who are kind of in charge, have been in charge of big media wherever you are. And as podcasting flourishes, if the people who aren't part of that right now, but are in podcasting and then like never also get to those areas, and I think that's a good indicator on how we play these kind of changing media environments.
Yeah, it's fascinating, you know, the whole you know, podcasting as this kind of guerrilla sort of outside the mainstream movement, and at the same time this monster waiting to pick and choose the bits and pieces on the buffet that it wants to eat and own. There have been a couple of listener questions, and I've just, because of the conversations just been kind of rolling along so nicely, I'm able to deal with any of them, but I'm going to just take one up because we do have to start winding this up as well. This is to Shandukani. By choosing to podcast, is CRF saying that radio is dying?
No, no, we're not saying radio is dying at all. In fact, when we think of our strategy, it rests a lot on radio. We can't do this without radio. It doesn't make sense in a South African context. We are very aware that most people, all of our relationships that exist with community radio stations. And we're very aware that most people don't have access to internet radio. To the internet, period. And so if we don't have platforms that we are using for people to access what we are creating, then we are wasting time. And this is something that I've said a couple of times now, is that we can't do any of what we are planning to do without distribution models. And distribution models being the radio as part of that, and then the internet as the other part. We're well aware that, you know, our primary audience won't have the access that we need them to have, but and to make sure that we don't leave them out of the conversation, we are working to have those collaborations with community radio stations and the national broadcaster, because one, the SABC is hungry for content, they got opportunity. So, you know, that's a very good place for us to knock. And community radio stations are also a good place for us to knock, because they're also getting shut down one by one, because apparently they're all the same. And, you know, we're getting to a point where Samro is saying there's just too many of them. Sorry, not Samro, the other union that we have. And so we have to use radio. And radio does not exist separately. In fact, I feel like podcasting is more of a competitor for video than it is for radio, because it's the same. It's also on digital.
Yeah.
So I don't know. No, radio's not dying. It's not dying. It's not gonna go anywhere. TV was supposed to kill radio. Radio refused to die. So I just don't see that happening anytime soon. We just need ways to continue to be able to fund ourselves and to make sure that we are continuing to find opportunities. Otherwise, then they stagnate.
Yeah, no, that's you and I must talk at some point. Those are all very interesting points. We need to wrap it up now. I'm just going to ask each of you, Kameel, Paula, and Shandukani, just to give us a minute or so of your closing comments on the whole state and future of podcasting, wherever you are. Kameel.
I mean,
30 seconds.
This whole conversation has been so energizing, and not that I don't already feel this way, but I just like podcasting is so lit, and I am like thrilled that I kind of tumbled my way into it, and super excited to now having these connections to think about it in a global way. So I can't wait to one day meet you all in person.
Paula?
Yes, I agree with everything you said, Kameel. These are exciting times. They're changing times. And what podcasting was last year in Kenya is different this year. It'll be different 3 months from now. It's just changing a lot very quickly. And it's not moving in the same direction that it is in the US or in the West, which is what is very exciting to me. It's this very sort of pioneering aspect in which we are moving. And I know it's very exciting because when I have conversations with similar podcast communities in Latin America or in the Middle East, or just in, for lack of, I don't like using the term, but in the global South, they are also on the same wavelength that we are in terms of where podcasting could go. What I'm excited about is now seeing this space that Kameel was talking about, where you turn on the radio and you don't know if you're listening to a podcast or a radio show. I still don't even know how you tell the difference. And is one supposed to tell the difference? That's very fascinating to me. And then also just the getting it to a point where just the two mediums just really intertwine in a way that just bounces off each other beautifully, and especially in an African context. How exciting is that for all of us? Yeah.
Shandukani, you get the last word.
So is Africa ready for podcasts? Yes, we are. We just have to be very, very inventive about how we get our audiences to jump onto those platforms. South Africa's, for example's radio drama, popularity is still very, very high.
Amazing.
Africa's history is in oral traditions. So of course we're ready for podcasts. It just makes sense. It's an extension of who we are. So sorry, BBC.
Pass along your message and say you said it, not me.
Honestly, they were doing video here. Why would we not be ready for podcasts? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. So yeah.
Time to wrap it up. It's been a pleasure talking to all three of you. Fascinating, really great, and I can feel the energy here. And I'm sitting in a darkened room in Killarney in Johannesburg. It's traveled around the world. And thanks, Paula, for putting us all in the same space together. And I look forward to meeting you all in Nairobi one of these days. Thanks a lot again for your time.
Thanks, everyone. Nice to meet you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.